Men are good, as are you. And today we're going to talk about why don't men wear face masks during the COVID-19 pandemic? That's a kind of a strange question, don't you think? You'll understand why we're asking that in just a minute. But before we do, let's look at something that I think is brilliant, and it's going to kind of be a prelude for what we're going to talk about today. And it's a write-up about how do you push a narrative. How do you push a narrative into the mainstream that's slanted, you know? And here, listen to this. Let's go. Number one, select issue affecting both sexes. Okay. Number two, ignore a large amount of women offenders entirely and absolve women of any blame. Yeah, we've seen that before, haven't we? 3, focus on male-only offenders. Yeah. 4, project it as a problem affecting all men. 5, it's now a gendered male-only issue. Women don't do this, right? We've seen that. Blame toxic masculinity, patriarchy as the reason for men's behavior. We've certainly seen that. Number 7, however, don't blame toxic femininity for the women who do this. That's misogyny. 8, don't enable comments on articles so people can't call out this obvious double standard. Rinse and repeat. Boy, have we seen that before? I think we have. You just think of domestic violence. It's a perfect example of it. Domestic violence where they only looked at the male violence and the female victims, even though there's about half and half. So I think this is a great little piece here, and it's by Hannah Robea, I think you pronounce her name. You can find her at HROBBEA. Anyway, this is going to help us as we go along today, and we're going to look at something. Basically, we're going to look at, okay, how do you paint a false narrative? How do you paint a false narrative? And let's see how you do that. You start with one from Yahoo. Men less likely to wear masks because they're not cool, study finds. Sociologists say toxic masculinity and racism also play a role. Sociologists say toxic masculinity and racism also play a role. How about that? Okay. And The Guardian, not to be outdone, Arwa Madawi says men are less likely to wear masks. Another sign that toxic masculinity kills. Toxic masculinity kills because men don't wear masks. Okay. And the Washington Post's got to join in the fray. Making men feel manly in masks is unfortunately a public health challenge of our time. Oh, our culture is just so weighted down by this, having to have a health challenge of making men wear masks. It's like, oh boy, give it a rest, Post. And they quote the same article. All of these articles are quoting the same study. We'll get there in a minute. And Jezebel, not to be outdone by anybody, masculinity is a death cult, and quotes the same study, right? Masks, men in the exhausting pursuit of desperate masculinity, says Esquire. Wait a minute. Wasn't Esquire a men's magazine at one time? So much for that. American men are opting to go maskless out of shame. Ironically, it's the weakest thing they could do. So who's shaming who here? Gracious goodness. And then Changing America says men less likely to wear face masks because they're not cool and a sign of weakness, says study, over and over again. Toxic masculinity is putting men at risk of getting coronavirus, new research shows. Okay, and here's the scientific frickin' American. Geez, the condoms of the face, why some men refuse to wear masks. It's not the first time masculine ideology has driven resistance to a public health initiative. So they're quoting the same study, and everyone's piling on here, hard and deep. Ay, shameful, not cool, a sign of weakness. Men are less likely to wear face masks to protect against coronavirus, study says. All of these things say the same thing. The same study they're quoting over and over says that it must be toxic masculinity, it must be racism, it must be men are thinking it's not cool. It's all kinds of crap. And when you see this many articles in a row that are shaming men like this, that ought to send up a red flag. What's the red flag say? Red flag says somebody's painting a narrative here. And I've found over the years that it's one of two things. Either the media is exaggerating what's going on in a study, or maybe the study is really pulling a fast one and is cooking the data in one way or another. And so what do you do to try and figure out exactly what's going on? Of course, what you do is you read the actual research. You get down and read the actual research. And yes, here it is. There's the actual research. And I read it cover to cover. And, where do we start? I mean, there's so many things about this study. And I'm going to have to leave out a lot of things because it would take us hours to go through, what's wrong with all of this, both the media and the study. But let's just take a little bit at a time here. One of the things that I found when I read the study was, okay, after reading the message, all participants took 3 scales. The first 2 scales were taken in random order. Here's the first scale out of 3 that they give to people. 1, intentions to wear a face covering. Participants were asked to be accurate and honest as they can be when rating the following items. When the shelter-in-place rules are relaxed, I intend to... Okay, wait a minute. Back up. When the shelter-in-place rules are relaxed, I intend to wear a face covering, blah, 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 blah. So the study's not asking about mask usage. It's saying, when these rules about face coverings are relaxed, are you more or less likely to wear a face covering? Completely and totally different question. Wait a minute. What the heck? So the media is definitely misquoting things. I mean, they're going just bananas because this research is saying when the shelter-in-place rules are relaxed, I am planning to do this or that. Pretty clear. Okay, next one. Intentions to practice physical distancing. Participants were asked to be as accurate and honest as they can when rating the following items. When the shelter-in-place rules are relaxed, I intend to... So again, it's about the shelter-in-place rules being relaxed. This is not about men choosing to wear a mask. It's not about men choosing to not be socially distant. It's about choosing to wear a mask or not wear a mask after the rules are relaxed. Completely, totally different. And then there's one last little piece here, the big 3. This is the third of the big 3 that are just unbelievable. Our pre-registered analysis of gender differences reveal a number of interesting results. Men less than women intend to wear a face covering. Yeah, but you don't give the evidence for that. This is true especially in counties where wearing a face covering is not mandatory. Okay, think about that. Indeed, in counties in which wearing the face covering is mandatory, gender differences in intentions to wear a face covering almost disappear. Okay, so let's get this straight. When wearing a face covering, a mask, is mandatory, men and women wear a face covering to the same degree. In other words, when he says the differences almost disappear, he's saying it's not a significant difference. It's men and women do it about the same. So wait a minute. The study's finding that when there's a mandatory mask rule, everyone wears it about the same, and that when they talk about maybe relaxing the rules, that men a little bit more will not wear a mask, but not a whole lot. And there it is. Indeed, in counties in which wearing the face covering is mandatory, gender differences in intentions to wear a face covering almost disappear. Oh boy. So the study's not about general mask usage. And in fact, it finds that general mask usage is about the same between men and women. So at this point, I'm thinking, wow, the media has really just gone hog wild with this thing. I mean, what else could there be? What other kind of explanation could there be? And, my thought right then was, well, I think I'll write to the researcher, which I usually do. In all these studies, they always have the chief researcher, and they give his email address, his or her email address. And you can write them, and usually they'll write you back. So I wrote him, And I said, I do have a question. I've read several articles online that cite your research, and all of them fail to mention the questions asked specifically were about what people would do after the shelter-in-place rules were relaxed, right? That was what I got from reading your research. Maybe I'm incorrect. This is a very different question from general willingness to wear a mask, and yet the media seems to be portraying it as if it's about mask usage in general. Do you see my concern here? Have you contacted any of the media outlets to let them know they're failing to include the correct question? Thanks, I'll be curious to hear back. And he got back to me the next day, and he says, many thanks for your email. I'm glad you found our research fascinating, which I did. Coming to your question, yes, you're right. We measured intentions to wear a face covering when shelter-in-place rules are relaxed. I agree that many pieces on the popular press were imprecise in this regard. Ooh, imprecise in this regard. But it was impossible to contact them all. The paper became viral, and over 100 news outlets covered it. Impossible to contact them all. Okay, but how about one or two? How about putting out a general message saying, this generally has been misinterpreted or something like that? But I couldn't find anything like that. And so I wrote him back again. I'd love to have a look at the raw data from your survey. Chuckle, chuckle. Anyway, any way you could send it, to me, that'd be great. A link or the data online or many thanks. So I want him to send me the raw data. What does he get back to? He gets back, oh, sorry for the late reply. Given the huge press coverage from this had, probably we have a preference for sharing the data only after acceptance of the paper. Sorry, it's under review now. Feel free to contact me again in a few weeks. Which I did. That was a few weeks later, I contacted him. Oh, no, not yet. And a few weeks after that again, no, not yet. And I contacted him just recently, and no, not yet. So they're a little bit resistant to giving the actual data, which I think would be pretty darn interesting. Because they give you some things, but they don't give you other things. And I'd love to just get a data just to see the whole thing, because they give you a part of things. Now, when you have a question about the media or the research, and you've talked to the researcher, what's the first thing you do after that? You read the press release. Because the press release, boys and girls, will tell you a lot about what's going on. One of the things I've found over the years is that in studies where they either are misinterpreted or are slanting the data, the first thing to read is the press release. Because the press release is going to set the tone, and it's going to tell you what the researchers are trying to get out into the public sphere. Okay? The next thing to read is the executive summary. The executive summary is a little bit closer to the truth, but it's still giving them, they're going to summarize things in a way that they want to spin it just like they want it. But then you read the research, the actual research after that, and you start to compare, okay, how is the research different from the press release and the executive summary? And man, you read feminist stuff, and it is night and day. And this one is kind of night and day too. Let's look a little bit at it. Here's the press release from the Middlesex University in Great Britain, someplace, I think. Anyway, MDX Academics Joint Research finds men less likely to wear masks to protect against COVID-19. Okay, now they're lying right off the bat. And if you look here, they start on a bad note. Men are less inclined to wear face masks in public to protect against COVID-19 than women, and more likely to agree that wearing one was either shameful, not cool, or a sign of weakness based on new research. Men are less inclined to wear face masks in public. Okay, can you see how now, knowing the questions that was asked in the research, can you see how that's really misleading? Terribly misleading. Now, the second sentence, they do a little bit better. These findings give an indication as to how men and women will react as lockdown restrictions are eased around the world and people are encouraged to wear a mask in public. Okay, so they're saying it'll give you an indication about what's going to happen, but they don't tell you that the actual questions they ask. The actual questions they ask were about what would you do if they were relaxed. So again, that's misleading. But then listen to this. Our results also revealed that men are more likely to express negative emotions and stigma when wearing a face mask covering. What? There were no questions in the whole study about men expressing negative emotions or women expressing negative emotions. Nothing. Zero. Where does that come from? Okay, so if you want to look at the press release, one of the things you can look at is the actual bullet points they'll give you. This is what they're trying to push, okay? So we're going to look at the bullet points, and usually they're going to give you their best stuff. They're going to give you the thing that pushes their narrative the best. So this is the best they got, okay? Let's take them one by one. 187 men gave negative answers with regards to their intention to wear face masks outside the home compared to 136 women. Okay, so they're talking about one question, and 187 men gave negative answers to that question, and 136 women gave negative answers. Okay, that sounds like, wow, more men did that than women, right? But let's look at it from a different point of view. Rather than look at it numerically, let's look at it from the point of view of the percentage of men. 187 men are 14.7% of the total men who took the survey. And 136 women are 11.5% of the women who took the survey. So, negative answers to wearing a mask. 85% must have had positive answers, either that or neutral, right? Because the only negative ones are the 14.7. And look at for the women, 88.5% said positive or neutral, 11.5 said negative. They're not telling us something. We're missing some things here. And I think they're probably important things. But look at the difference between the two, men and women. 11.5% of the women had negative answers, and 14.7% of the men had negative answers. Does that justify the kinds of media bullshit you see where they're saying men do this and men do that? It's almost as many women doing this as men. But you don't see diddly about that now, do you? Next one. 99 men strongly disagreed with the statement that they intend to wear a mask outside their home, compared to only 58 women. Anytime in research you see someone say only, you got to look both ways before you cross the street. I mean, they're trying to say, oh, lots of men did this, but only 58 women did this, right? Okay, so let's do the same thing with this. Don't intend to wear a mask outside the home. And remember, this is also after the rules are relaxed. But now look, it's 7.8% of the men and 5% of the women. That's pretty close, don't you think? So there's almost as many women who are deciding to do this as there are men don't intend to wear a mask outside the home. Weird. When asked whether they agree that wearing a face covering is not cool, men answered on average 5.03 out of 10 compared to 4.67 for women. Wow. Is that a lot? No. Look at the chart. Remember, 0 to 10. 0 is this is totally cool wearing a mask. And 10 is this is totally uncool. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in between those two, right? And here's the answer for number 5. Number 5 said, I neither agree or disagree with this. Men had 5.03 average, an average of 5.03. So most men said, I neither agree or disagree that it's not cool to wear a mask. Right? 4.67 women. So it's almost the same amount of women. And women are almost up to that same place where they say they neither agree or disagree. What? Can you see why I really want the raw data here to look at the rest of the answers to this question? Who answered what in what way? But one of the things we're clear about is, A, the media really took this to the bank and started just spreading bullshit. There's nothing in the study about toxic masculinity. And there's very little in there about, racism or whatever. But the media has taken these things and glommed onto it. Plus, they've misinterpreted the thing so badly. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The researcher has also screwed up here. He has made no effort to try and correct the media malfeasance. He's made no effort whatsoever, at least that I could find. And at this point, I'm still wondering, is he doing this on purpose or is he just lazy? I mean, he could have just written a tweet that says, a lot of people are misinterpreting this. Please don't do that. Or they could have had something about an addendum to that press release that said, please understand that a lot of media said this or that, and it's just, not the case according to this study. So then I found this video. This video, Bloomberg video, done by Madison Mills. And some of you may remember Madison Mills from the Chicago ICMI. And she interviewed Valerio Caprero, who is the researcher, and Liz Plank, who is a breathy feminist. Breathless, breathy feminist, something like that. Anyway, here's the researcher. And it's a 30-minute interview. He doesn't say one thing in this interview about how the media has misinterpreted things. How about that? In fact, it was the feminist who brought up near the end that when it's mandatory, men and women are the same, which blew my mind that she would bring that up. And he said, oh, yes, that's right. It's like, and neither one of them seemed to understand how important that was. That, wait a minute, men and women are the same when it's mandatory. Crazy stuff, eh? Absolutely crazy stuff. So I decided at that point that this guy is in on it. That he is creating a narrative that then the media can take and run with and expand on and exaggerate. Because otherwise, think about it. If you had done some research and put a lot of work into it, and he obviously put a lot of work into this study. If you had done a study, you put a lot of work into that daggone thing, and the media starts misinterpreting it, wouldn't you be out there in a heartbeat saying, wait a minute, whoa, that's not what we were looking at? You would think so. Not much effort from our friend here, Valerio, who won't give us the raw data. How about that? So let's summarize things. Both the researcher and the media failed miserably. The researcher failed to correct multiple exaggerations and distortions of his work. The media created a one-sided lie in order to shame and blame men. This is evil. And it's evil being together and working together like this too. This is the dirty work of a few that impacts millions. Wow. Now, let's go over Hannah's stuff to begin with and think about it based on what we've gone through now, what we've talked about. Select issue affecting both sexes. Absolutely. In this case, both sexes are involved in wearing a mask or in not wearing a mask. 2, ignore a large amount of women offenders entirely and absolve women of any blame. They certainly did that. 3, focus on male-only offenders. Yes, indeed, they did that. 4, project it as a problem affecting all men. And yes, indeed, that was the case. 5, now it's a gendered male-only issue. Women don't do this. Yes, we see that. 6, blame toxic masculinity, patriarchy as the reason for some men's behavior. Yes. However, don't blame toxic femininity for the women who do this. That's misogyny. Right. Don't enable comments on articles so people can't call out this obvious double standard. Rinse and repeat for thousands of different articles on different subject matters. Oh boy, simultaneously release thousands of articles with the women are wonderful effect. Ignore good men and bad women. Magnifying glass on good women, often with fake stats. So Hannah, thank you very much for really a beautiful template that we can look at for how fake news and fake research is pushed out there that literally colors people's brains. This is brainwashing. It's hard to be upset with the general population because they have been fed this kind of bullshit by people they shouldn't trust but do trust, and they believe it to be the truth. And that is what we're up against, folks. And what they don't say to you, and what is so absolutely true, is that men are good, as are you. Oh boy, we'll see you then. You take care. Do 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 do.